Welcome to We Are On Call, the officially unofficial podcast of On Call, Amazon's police drama. And I'm Clayton Cranford. I'm joined by Omar Martinez.
How you doing? Nice to be here again. Looking forward to it.
Yeah. And we're going to discuss all the things happening in episode 5. Of course, there will be spoilers. So if you haven't watched it yet, please watch it first. Or if you don't mind being spoiled and you go into the episode with all the kind of the back knowledge that police knowledge that Omar and I are going to be discussing, then I don't know, that might make it more fun. Who knows? Anyway, let's begin and let's discuss episode 5, Omar.
Sounds good. Sounds good. So, episode 5 is called Not Your Savior. Not Your Savior. And scene 1 starts out basically with the two riding around in a car, typical during the day, people on the sidewalk crossing the street. And while they're waiting, there's a group of, probably Diaz's age or thereabouts crossing the street, and they're looking at their phones, they're talking, they're not paying attention. Probably would be typical for that age. Not a whole lot of attention to the surroundings, and Diaz makes a comment like, hey, like, what are they doing? They're not even paying attention. So that's where the scene starts, and then they go on to have a conversation about Diaz seems a little grumpy and kind of distracted, and so Harmon starts to talk to him about like, hey, like, what's going on? Well, you seem like you're distracted. And so then he goes on to say that, that he, on his days off, helped somebody move out. And as the discussion continues, it turns out that he helped his ex-girlfriend move out. And so Harmon and Diaz start to have some conversations about relationships and how Diaz's girlfriend was saying that, he seemed a little distant and kind of distracted. And so that kind of led to them breaking up, and that's what ended up happening. And that's what he was doing over the weekend, over his days off. And then that conversation leads into Harmon's relationship and like, what's going on with you. And she, provides a little bit of information about her dating somebody from LAPD, and that she had, eventually turned into her husband and had an ex-husband that ended in divorce. And they end up going from there. They end up going off to see Diaz's mom. He says he's got to go see somebody, and then after their conversation, they're arriving at the next scene. So, for me, when I'm thinking of this scene here, and I don't know what you were thinking, I mean, as far as a conversation between the two, probably, relatively typical. Not a whole lot of personal information going on between a trainee and an FTO. Especially, I think we're looking at, this has got to be like his first week or so. And they're talking like partners almost a little bit. So it's kind of interesting that way. I don't know what your take on it was.
Yeah, that's the first couple of weeks. You're as a trainee, you're just like trying not to miss things. You're trying to impress your TO. You're trying to stay on their good side. And so yeah, so some of that stuff, you're right, wouldn't be something that you'd really discuss until later on in that. But we got to speed things up. It's it's TV land, so we need to kind of push the narrative forward with these relationships. But yeah, I thought law enforcement can be hard on relationships for sure. Just the the long hours, the shift work. You come home and you're just smoked, like just
Mm-hmm.
mentally more than anything. You just don't have a lot left, and especially if you've had an emotional day. You're just dealing with people and all the negative energy that comes with in those situations. But you're just driving for 12 hours, and you have to constantly be concentrating, and it just
Mm-hmm.
burns a lot of brain calories. I don't know how to say it.
Mm-hmm.
It's just taxing. So yeah, if you come home and that person's like looking forward to seeing you all day, and maybe you work that night, yeah, there's nothing left. You got nothing left in the tank. So I was lucky in many ways marrying my wife, but one of the ways was she was a nurse, so she worked shift work, and so
Mm-hmm.
she understood full well what that means. And so she and we both were able to kind of give each other a lot of grace. And so yeah, when you go into a law enforcement while you're in a relationship. I really feel like did Long Beach do this? Did they do like something where the spouses could come in and like chat with, like there's almost like an orientation. Like they did this in the military. So my wife was a Navy nurse, and they would have active duty spouse like get-togethers, and when we go to a new duty station, you kind of get to know everybody. But there was like almost like an orientation, like kind of this is what you should be expecting. This is so they kind of break you in a little bit. I think law enforcement agencies should do that. What do you think?
Well, I know that it takes place during the academy. Like there's a part in the academy where they bring in the family members, and they
Mm.
really are talking about the academy and not really the job after the academy. But
Mm-hmm.
it's them kind of preparing family members and significant others like spouses and wives or husbands or whatever the case may be about what the job is going to take, what kind of toll it will take, the like you said, the shift work, um, and the mental toll. There's a lot, that it doesn't look like there's a lot going on, when somebody goes off to work, and then when they're at work, as soon, if you're watching a show and that's the way you orientate yourself to the job, you're thinking, oh, that doesn't look so bad. That look kind of fun, but it is taxing. I mean, there's a term they call when law enforcement and other people in kind of high stress environments work, they call it like hypervigilance. And so that when you go into work, you go into this hypervigilant state. It's kind of this heightened awareness. And during the time you're at work, and it's different for everybody. Sometimes it's when you drive into the parking lot at work. Sometimes it's when you walk through the door at the back of the station. But you go into this hypervigilant state, and everything becomes, you're paying attention to a lot more stuff than you would normally pay attention to than if you were just driving around in your personal vehicle. And that hypervigilant state doesn't really leave until you're kind of off. But because you're in that state, when you get home, you're like exhausted. You just want to sit in the chair and just kind of veg. And there's almost a recovery time for you to come out of that kind of abnormal state until you're kind of back into a normal awareness state before you go back to work. And then the pattern starts all over again. So that, I think that's what you were talking about, is that you're mentally spent at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And
And
so family members got to get used to that kind of, you know.
yeah, that it requires a little bit. Yeah, it requires some support for sure to really for longevity in
Mhm.
those relationships. There needs to be some kind of understanding support, and like and it yeah not only like it changes your psyche, it changes your body. Like your body's producing
Mhm.
a lot of cortisol when you're on
Mhm.
duty, and if you're not exercising on your days off, you're losing muscle and you're gaining fat, and it's just like hormonally, it's especially if you're working nights, like your circadian rhythms are getting flipped on their head. So it's just very. Uh, I'd love to see some studies about like just post retirement longevity in this job as opposed to others where working nights and things and just inhaling the stress. I
Mhm.
mean, it's just it's rough. It's rough on your whole self. It can be, but yeah. So you know, uh, we had a guy in the academy who his girlfriend broke up with him in the middle of the academy, and I
Yeah.
think her complaint was kind of that same complaint, like you're just not around and blah blah blah. And we're just like, man, like that's
Mhm.
it's tough, but
Yeah. Yeah, when I was at the academy, we would have trainees, recruits come in, and they felt like they couldn't continue even to do the training part because they didn't feel like they had the support at home. Because you do
mhm,
need support. You need to know that, when you get home, you're going to have to study, you're going to eat, and then you're going to go to sleep, and it's going to start all over again, that very next day, 5 days a week, or whatever the schedule is for that particular academy. And they've got to, they're going to have to help you with that. They're going to have to
yeah,
be kind of understanding that that's the routine. And the second thing, I think, that kind of when they were talking about relationships, and he mentioned, oh, she says I feel distant, like I just, I'm maybe not engaged with her. And I think a little bit is probably the hypervigilance when he's coming back down. But the other part is, you know, you, you know, I mean, I don't know about you, but if you saw something at work or something, was kind of traumatic, I didn't necessarily come home and share all the details about that event, with my wife. And so, you know, you, part of it is how you figure figure that out, how you handle that, and how you address when you have those traumatic events at work. Do you kind of put it someplace, and or do you talk to your coworkers about it, or do you have a friend you talk to? Or some officers, or law enforcement may talk to their family members, may talk to their wife, and so how you kind of handle that and kind of process it is different for everybody.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So so scene two. Scene two is they get they end up going to Diaz's mom's work. And he says, "Hey, I got to go." It turns out to be my mom. And Harmon's like, "Yeah, let's go talk to your mom. I want to meet your mom." And so they end up driving over to, it looks like some kind of industrial place, and there's equipment being moved around and things happening. And so the mom comes out, and immediately there's this negative, like the mom seems a little negative towards law enforcement, like kind of like what's she doing here and what's going on. And so Harmon kind of picks up on this pretty quick and says, "Hey, no problem. I'll go back to the police car. You can go ahead and, have a conversation with your mom." And during that conversation, the mom tells Diaz that, basically her brother, or her son, Diaz's brother, is in trouble. And sounds like what mom's saying is he's in prison. And she's telling Diaz, "Hey, look, he's in trouble and it has to do with you. Apparently you upset some people from East Barrio, and now they're looking like they're going to want to kill him or do something, awful to him." And so they're having this conversation, and the mom is blaming him. And of course, Diaz is trying to, like, "Hey, I'm okay. Well, maybe there's something I can do." And so then, so now this is something that he's thinking about while he's training. And so I don't know. As far as like investigating and going out there and doing, police work, I mean, it's definitely, you're coming across all kinds of people, and there can be some dangers in there for sure.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that he has a brother who's incarcerated and like, I mean, I worked in the jails for many years and as a deputy and as a sergeant, and you would never, well, number one, as a law enforcement officer, you wouldn't want to tell somebody that you have a family member in prison. And if you were in prison, you would not want to tell anybody that one of your family members is law enforcement. So that,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's a safety issue. The other thing, we go into later. I mean, he doesn't want to go into protective custody, and we ends up talking to him. But yeah, I mean, like I don't know how you undo that. So yeah, that's a
Yeah.
real problem. Because yeah, I guess we'll just see how they handle it in the show. But honestly, like the problem is when you go into protective custody in county, then it translates in the state or state back to county. You're always in protective custody. You can never come out of protective custody once you go in.
Mm-hmm.
And for a lot of these guys, they don't want that. Some guys do. Some people in prison and in county, because when you're in protective custody, you get to do some things that you can't do otherwise. Like you're able to kind of mingle with people who are also in protective custody. There's a lot of gang dropouts in protective custody. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it kind of depends on the situation. But bottom line is, he's really in a difficult spot that Diaz can't really fix. I mean, I guess I was just thinking about it, if, like, I was Diaz, especially knowing what I know now. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
basically calling, talking to the watch commander, or finding out who's over there, and just kind of tell him your situation. And there's things that they could do
Mm-hmm.
that to protect him without maybe putting him in protective custody, perhaps. But when it's coming from a law enforcement person who's calling, like they tend to want to work with you and help you out a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, I would think that he's obviously, we're going to get into that a little bit later, where he's figuring out how to handle it and what to do. And there's going to be some back and forth about, how he's going to go about that. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about it here in the next scene. I think it's the
Yeah.
next one, or the scene after the next one. But it's something he can't do on his own for sure. And he's brand new. He's a trainee. He's not the one to be problem solving this thing. I mean, that's my first thought is you need people with experience, people that know the system, people that know how things work. You don't have enough understanding and grasp of, like, you're talking about the custody and the, protective custody and how it works and some of the things. Like, he doesn't know any of that. So how is he
No,
going to
that
make
would be like a captain to captain thing. Like your watch commander would take you to the sergeant, sergeant would take you to the commander or whatever, and then
Mm-hmm.
somebody at that level would reach out to them at that level, and
Right.
they would talk about it. So yeah, it's not something you would handle at like the line, like
Yeah.
the
The
very
line
bottom
level.
of the line
Yeah.
level.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, obviously he wants to help his brother, but he's just not the problem solving guy in this particular. So scene three is they get dispatched to a 415 dispute. When they arrive, they roll up to the call, and there's a female pounding on the front door. She tells officers that she's trying to get her daughter back from her ex-husband. Apparently, her daughter didn't show up to school. 10-year-old daughter didn't show up to school, and she hasn't seen her daughter in 2 days. Normally, she would see the daughter 2 days, but the husband ended up keeping the daughter for a couple extra days. So she's worried, obviously, because the daughter didn't show up to school. And now she's over there finding out what's going on, and nobody's answering the door. So there's basically a call that sounds like it comes from a neighbor or somebody because they hear the pounding on the door and the yelling and the screaming. And so then what you get is Harmon and Diaz rolling up, and they contact her and kind of get the story, find out what she's doing there. And she says that the daughter is there at least because, she knows the phone's there because she's tracking the daughter's phone. She has like an app on there. And the daughter's phone is there, but nobody's answering. And she's worried. Harmon goes and walks up to the door and knocks on the door, says, "Hey, no, I'll help you. We'll help you. Just step back with my partner." And she walks up to the door, knocks on it, and a female answers the door, maybe mid-20s or late 20s, and kind of gives a story that, oh, yeah, the daughter, she's sick. She's not feeling well. She's, in the back resting. And so, of course, Harmon's going to want to walk in. The mom's upset. We want to make sure she's here and okay
Welfare
and
check.
everything.
Yeah,
Yeah,
welfare check.
welfare check for sure. Welfare check, and then she says, "Well, you can't just come in here, this and that." She says, "Well, I know we're coming in to check to make sure she's okay, whether you tell us we can or not." And so eventually, she does make her way in. They walk through the door. There's a couple subtle things that happen that we'll talk about, but when she walks in and she's doing a check, basically a welfare check of the residence to see if the daughter's there. She walks into the back bedroom after the female says, "Yeah, her room's in the back," and sees the backpack lying on the bed, and then kind of walks around a little more and then kind of investigates and sees some power cords coming in from the side window, from the kitchen window into the kitchen. And that kind of draws her attention and gets her thinking, like, well, where are the power cords going, maybe? And then she ends up walking back out to the front with the female, and she's calling for backup because they need a few more people to kind of work through this problem. And the female that's inside, supposedly it's just one of many girlfriends of the ex-husband. They end up walking out. Once the backup arrives, her and Diaz walk to the detached garage in the back where the power cords lead to. And when they, you're wondering what's going on in there, what's going to happen when they open the door. A little bit of a tense moment. And they open the door, and there's two men in there. One looks like it's the father. The daughter is sitting in a chair tied up, and it looks like they're doing some kind of ritual of some sort. And so at first you're like, what's going on here? And so they immediately, kind of do their thing and control those two guys so they're not a threat, and they get the daughter out. And then so when they walk around to the front, obviously, she's telling the other officers who's going to jail, and the father's going to be going to jail, and the girlfriend's going to be going to jail, the girlfriend that lives in the house. And so that kind of, there's a little bit more kind of discussion about, he's the dad and what's he doing with the daughter tied up in the chair. There's a whole nother conversation on that for sure. But he goes out, the ambulance shows up, probably to check on the daughter. and it looks like one of the firefighters or ambulance drivers knows Harmon, and gives her some information about her sister, saying, "Hey, just so you know, we saw her. We got information that your sister is over here." And Harmon is like, there's thanks, but like basically, I can't real. We've tried to help her, and there's really nothing I can do for her. She's kind of on her own. She kind of wants to be on her own. And then, of course, that's where it kind of wraps up. So, I mean, as far as the whole beginning of this scene, how do you think it kind of rolled out as a typical response to maybe even a 415 call, just like it was?
Well, I know it's a TV show, but you don't park right in front of the house. That
Yeah.
always gets me. They do it in every show, but I mean, it'd be weird. I mean, they really should be parking down the street, walking up. But yeah, I mean, it was. Dude, I've been to so many custody
Mm-hmm.
things where the kid was supposed to be delivered, shared custody wasn't, still at the house, and really, it's really kind of a civil issue. Like we can't force anybody to release a kid if they're the actual guardian. Like basically, they just have to go to court and petition the court that the parent wasn't abiding to their custody agreement. Is really what it is. So
Right.
I was watching that. I'm like, oh, that's probably what this is. But then yeah, it goes off the rails really fast with the casita exorcism thing going on. But yeah, it was like when she went inside,
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my gosh, this looks like a tweaker house. Like this is super
Oh
gross.
yeah, totally. Yeah.
And was there a lock on the door, like on the outside on her
Oh, the
bedroom?
garage door or the bedroom
No,
door?
no, no, her bedroom door. Am I
There may
remembering
have
that
been.
right?
I think they might have like looked up on there for a moment and saw a
Okay.
lock. I
I
think
can't.
I yeah,
I don't know if I'm getting this one mixed up with another TV show. Not my,
yeah.
but
I mean, it
yeah,
was definitely a
like
tweaker pad for
yeah,
sure. Yeah,
there's yeah, totally yeah, and yeah, this would be like a total tweaker thing to do. Actually,
mm-hmm,
like hallucinating, thinking that people are
mm-hmm,
possessed, your kid's possessed, and you got to like exorcise the demons.
mm,
So yeah, yeah,
yeah,
that was crazy. I wasn't expecting that when they opened the door to the attached detached unit there. But
yeah. It was like, is it going to be something that is going to be not good to see, or what's it?
yeah,
You're obviously the big question mark is before you open that door, but you never know what's behind a door when you open it, and that's the thing. It is that moment, and that's one of the things the show gives you a little bit of that when you're standing outside and they're kind of getting ready to go in and they're pausing. But even when you're doing the job and you're going to open a door and go in, there's that moment where you're like, what is on the other side of this? And you never know. And for me, there's been all kinds of crazy things that you wouldn't expect to see. And, you don't, is it going to be awful? Is it not going to be awful? Is it going to be traumatic? And so the show kind of does give you a little bit of that when you're sitting at the door ready to go in and
yeah,
make
yeah.
entry.
Um, when you're saying that, I like a little flashback. Um, we had a self-inflicted gunshot suicide, um, and the guy shot himself in the face with a shotgun,
Mm,
and kind of like under his chin. And so when we entered that room, like all we knew that there was a shotgun blast in there. The wife was in the house when it happened. So we're guns up. Like we don't know. Is he
mm-hmm,
standing there with a gun? Is he going to shoot us? Like, we banged on the door, no answer, and we ended up going in there.
mm-hmm,
And yeah, it was like it took a moment for my brain to process. Like, what am I looking at right here? You know what I mean? Like I kind of knew,
mm-hmm.
but you're like, no, this is
Yeah.
this is not this is not what
Yeah.
I should be looking at right now. But you don't have a choice. Like it's your job, right? Like you
Right.
can't not look at it. You can't look away. You have to
Right. Yeah.
just and manage that stuff. And that's another thing I don't think people really have a good appreciation of is like the kind of things
Mm-hmm.
that we have to absorb and not look away. I mean, nurses and
Mm-hmm.
doctors, I think, maybe they, in an ER situation, I think they also, you don't know who's coming through that back door into the ER. I think there's some of that there too. But there's something about it being, at least in the ER, you're going to get people coming in like from car accidents. They're going to be beat up, mangled, whatever, gunshot wounds, whatever.
But probably still alive. I mean, they're.
But
I mean,
probably still alive. Yes, yeah, you're going to be
you know,
alive. You know that much,
not
but maybe not
right.
all in one piece. But like when you go through a door, you don't know. You don't know what's going to be on the other side of that.
Yeah, yeah.
Different.
I had a deal where I got dispatched to a call. There was a narcotics team in the parking lot. Next to the parking lot was a, I don't know, it was like 4-story apartment building. And while they were doing a debrief in the parking lot, they had seen a male from like the 4th floor walk out of the balcony and jump.
Ooh.
And so they saw this like happen while they were down there. And so then we responded to the apartment to check, and we didn't know exactly where it was at. I was there with another officer who worked the same area, and we heard a child basically crying, screaming and crying inside the apartment. They're all apartments. And so we're standing out in front, and we realized very quickly that we were going to have to go in to find out what the heck just happened. And there were no gunshots heard, but we heard the screaming and crying child. So I forced entry. We both went in, and what had happened is, I don't know if the person was having like a mental episode, but he had a 7-year-old, and he had taken it was like maybe 6-year-old, 7, 6, and he had put the tub on and put like scalding water in there, and then had put they were probably a little younger. They were probably like 5. I say they're 5, and then put the child in the water in the tub. And so that's why they were screaming. So when we went in, there was no other person other than the child. We took the child out of the bathtub, and then obviously we could say that area was safe, and then we handled the second part of it, which was the suicide, related. But it was like one of those where we were at the door. We didn't know what we were going to encounter when we forced entry in. And, it's one of those moments where, that's what you're supposed to do. And we did it, but it was, it's a little
Yeah,
intense.
it is intense. Like you're just dumping adrenaline and cortisol. Yeah, and it's gonna take hours and hours and hours for your body to like come back from. If I mean, if it even does
Yeah.
by the end of that shift. I mean, it's just like it's a hit. It's a hit to
Yeah.
your entire system, your brain, your and especially when you have a kid who's being hurt. I mean, my God, like
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
was always the thing that got me the most. And I did a lot of work in the juvenile justice area, but I never wanted to work in child sex
Yeah.
crimes
Child abuse
or child
or,
abuse. I was not interested in
mhm.
doing that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's too
That would be
much.
tough.
It's too much for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And, those that do it, hats off to them for being able to, you know, help children that are victims
Yeah.
in various crimes. Cause that is a tough job mentally. It's going to definitely, I'm sure it wears you down after a period of time. And, the thing about it is, like in that call, let's say, for example, someone has got to write the report and kind of document it. Let's say that's me, and I go in with my beat partner. He may say, okay, do you need anything else from me? And he may go right back into service. He might say, okay, I'm cleared here. Put me whatever, 10-8, put me back
Calls are waiting.
in service. Calls are waiting. And he just had that adrenaline dump. He went in with me to, check the house. And now he's got to just basically just go right back to normal mode and answer
Yeah.
calls. So
And then he shows up at the next call and he's still like jacked up from that call. And then that person is like, this police officer just has the worst attitude. you
yeah,
know,
yeah,
like they don't
yeah,
know what you just came from.
yeah. And
You
he's got to
know,
be able to say, like, I mean, he could say, you know what, I need a minute. I'm going to go take a short little break. But sometimes, I mean, there are many times that didn't happen. We just would clear. We didn't have to write any paper. We didn't have to do a report. We put ourselves, basically back in service for the next call. And you're still kind of feeling it. I mean, it takes a while to remove that adrenaline from your from your
Yeah.
body. It doesn't instantly just flush out, and then you're like, oh, okay, hey, I'm good. Let's just, normal state.
Yeah. Well, for sure. And that's, yeah, you call your sergeant and you're like, "Hey, Sarge, I just came from this call and I was still messed up from that other one, and I think you're probably gonna get a complaint, just FYI." You know? Until your
Yeah,
sergeant, "I got this,
yeah,
I got you, buddy," So that's
yeah,
just, but
yeah,
the civilian, the person's calling for something, and when the police officer shows up and they just, they're not in a great mood, or they're just, short or whatever, I mean, give them a little grace, because you don't know.
yeah,
You don't know where they just came
yeah,
from.
for sure. It's one of those things where they're not going to lay out their day for you, so you can have a little compassion
Yeah,
for them.
yeah, they don't want a
But
pity party. You know what I mean?
yeah,
They're
for
trying to do their
sure.
job. Yeah.
Yeah. So and then of course there's a little bit about her doing the arrest, and then it looks like the ex-husband and the girlfriend are going to jail. And then there's that piece at the end where the ambulance driver gives her a little bit of info about her daughter. So we're getting a little bit more about the daughter,
About her
and
sister.
or I'm sorry, about her sister. And that she's at a point where she just really can't help her anymore. And
Yeah.
I don't really have any personal experience with family and that sort of thing, dealing with somebody who's trying to either on the street or trying to get off the street or under the influence, or they have some addiction. But her sister clearly has some addiction issues, and that's something that she has to deal with as a sister, and figure out how she's going to try to help her. And it sounds like she tried to and wasn't real successful, and she's kind of taken a step back. And I don't know if there's going to be more to that story later, as we move down the episodes. But it's definitely, you could tell she's definitely at a place where she's kind of, just nothing more I can do for her. I've tried,
Yeah.
and I'm just going to let her do her thing. So scene 4 is kind of begins with an an overview of the downtown area. Diaz and Harmon are back in the car driving, and while they're driving, Diaz keeps looking at his phone, and like he's apparently he's speaking to his mom. Diaz tells Harmon that his brother has a green light on him from the East Barrio maniac arrest, and they're looking to go after his brother in prison. And so Diaz is trying to troubleshoot. And we talked about this a little bit earlier. He's trying to troubleshoot and kind of come up with a solution to keep his brother safe. And, maybe they can ask somebody from East Barrio, like that person that Harmon had talked to when they were looking for Maniac, for help. And while they're having this discussion, a BMW is driving erratically down the street, and they decide to conduct a stop. Looks like it runs through a red light, and they conduct a stop to see what's going on with this car, because it's behaving really strange and it almost caused an accident. And so when they get up to the car after they do the traffic stop, they see an older gentleman in there who looks like he's in a hospital gown. And he says he just come from the hospital, and that he wanted to leave so he could go get some tacos or something because he was hungry, and maybe he didn't like the hospital food. And so while they're
Co-sign
kind
on
of
that one.
dealing with, what's that?
I said I'll
Yeah.
co-sign on that one. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. He wanted a taco. He was hungry. It's like, yeah, he's like, man, this hospital food's horrible. I want some good fast food. And
Yeah.
so while Harmon is kind of dealing with this guy, Diaz steps away and starts to talk to his brother about, hey, look, I'm going to try to help you. I know that, you're in danger in there. And his brother's like, don't worry about it. It's no big deal. I'll handle it. Kind of a thing. Don't put me in, protective custody. And so Diaz goes back to Harmon and says, hey, maybe we can get Smokey, apparently is that guy's name at the bar, and maybe we can get Smokey to help us out. And Harmon says, look, you're not dealing with a normal person here. This Smokey guy is a killer, and you can't just go and ask him for help like you're calling the Coast Guard or something. You're calling some government agency to assist you. And so Diaz gets upset with Harmon, like, basically like, you're not willing to help me. We need to do something. And kind of like, I can see why people don't, trust you, so to speak. And then while they're talking about this, they see something going on at the gas station nearby, and in a moment, that'll take us to that next scene. But I mean, you've probably done a traffic stop where you've seen something and you end up pulling somebody over, and it was a little bit of a surprise. You're like, I didn't expect to see this, or, this is not what I expected when I stopped this car.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, I don't think I've ever had anybody in a hospital gown. But
Yeah.
yeah, but there's been some things. I stopped a guy who I looked at his license, said he was like 98 years old or something like that,
Mm,
and still valid license.
still
um,
driving.
but still trucking out there. But yeah, nothing quite like that.
Yeah. I mean, we would have, patients walk away from hospitals all the time. I mean, we'd get a
Oh, we've
call
had
that
those for sure.
yeah,
Yeah,
for sure. And then this guy basically just took it the next step where apparently he took his car keys and found his car wherever it was at and jumped into his car and drove off. That doesn't happen too often because usually, you know, they don't have a car there while they're in the hospital, especially if it's an extended stay,
right.
unless they get dropped off or,
He
you know,
wanted to get some Sancho's tacos.
yeah.
Delicious.
It is, yeah, that's definitely, when you're hungry, you're hungry. And you'll see that too, you'll like, generally after the hours when the bars close, you see the fast food places fill up, especially if
Yeah.
it's near a drinking area, because they're all going there to get their tacos, whether it's a Taco Bell or the
The
local
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Mexican
there's
place.
actually there's some really great taco places in Long Beach.
Oh yeah. Oh
Yeah.
yeah, and yeah, there's nowadays too. There are probably more, but nowadays they allow people to basically make the tacos right out on the street. But there was always a few of those.
Yeah.
But generally, it was in this. There was the stores, and they were open late on the weekends. You'd get them till like 2 a.m., 1 or 2 a.m. because you'd get the people coming out from the bars and they were looking for something to eat, and those places were open. Um,
Dude,
and they,
a carne asada like taco at 2 o'clock in the morning after coming out of a bar.
yeah,
That's
it's
like
delicious.
that's like a fond memory of my 20s right there.
Yeah, no, for sure. Or that carne asada. For me, it was a carne asada burrito, and you add in the guacamole too.
Yes.
And it's delicious. It's
Yeah.
always, for some reason, it's always more delicious in those early morning hours.
Oh my God. Yeah. The best.
And so this guy's looking for the he's looking for the taco, and Diaz is trying to figure out how to help his brother. And that part of that is a little bit like he needs to realize that this is a kind of above his pay grade, so to speak, and he needs to go get some help from some people that have
Mhm.
access to other parts of the criminal justice system so that he can help his brother, including the prisons, and maybe the sheriff's department, and to figure out how they can keep his brother safe if he's truly worried about him, and his brother's willing to get some kind of help. I mean, he can obviously refuse it and say no, I don't need it, and stay where he's at.
But
But then,
they could move him to a different area, the jail or the prison, away from those guys. Like there are some things that they could do. I don't know what that would mean. And seeing the jail and prison are so different, because we
hmm
have these pods, and so each pod is kind of its own little world, and you can move somebody in there, and then they'll never interact with anybody from any of those other areas because the food is brought to them in their cell, as
hmm
opposed to like kind of old school prison where they have like a chow hall or something. Like one of
right,
our jails had, we had the main jail, and we had a chow hall, so you have to move guys from the cell blocks to the chow hall and back, and that was inevitably where fights and other things would happen. So, but yeah, it's
yeah.
I don't know what kind of jail or prison system he's in. If it's like, oh, didn't they say was he in Corcoran or no? Was he in
Uh,
Chino?
I don't remember if they said the facility because you know that
Yeah.
obviously every prison is set up different. Some are more modern than others. Some are designed to sequester certain people and put them in
Yeah.
areas that keep them
Well,
from any contact with the rest of the population.
yeah. I mean, if he's in
Um,
Chino, then like it's old school, like gray bar hotel
mm-hmm.
style.
Open bedding areas where there's just bunks.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah,
just
they have barracks
hmm
style, or just bunks like lined up in a barrack style, which I always thought was insane. But
yeah, yeah.
whatever.
I like you probably too. You end up doing some training classes and you get to go do the tour and you get to
Mhm.
see how you get information about the prison culture and some of the gangs in the in the prisons, and also you get a look at one of the prisons to see what the facility is like, to see what you don't see them, you don't have to see them all, but part of the class is seeing at least one of them.
Hmm.
And it was Chino that I ended up going to. I think that was
Yeah.
on that one. So scene six. Scene six is where they end up seeing something going on across the street, and let's see. While they're oh no, scene five. Scene five where they look across the street and it looks like there's an argument around a gas pump. And so when they drive over there to get kind of find out what's going on, they see a male, 30s, and it looks like the wife is there, and they're having an argument. And if you're looking at the car's parked there like it's going to get gas, and it looks like there's a small child in the back seat. And so the wife is saying, that he's, bipolar and he's tried to kill himself, and, that he's got this toxic behavior. And so then Diaz goes there and he's trying to like de-escalate and kind of, talk to the guy. And from there, it basically just kind of escalates.
Yeah.
He ends up,
A little bit.
yeah, quickly it escalates. He ends up grabbing the gas pump and he's putting gas all over himself. And the child's still in the back seat. They remove the wife kind of away from the gas pump area, but now he's covered in gasoline. He takes out a lighter. There was a moment there where it acted like he had a gun, and then they were kind of like, okay, but no. Then he ends up grabbing the hose to the gas pump, and now there's this negotiation that's going on to get him to kind of put down the gas pump, and so they can kind of deal with them and get him away from the child, and kind of talk to him better in a safer place than in front of the gas pump on with gas all over him. And so that's a whole they definitely talk about some of that going on there. And so then what he does is, Diaz is trying to like empathize with him and talk to him and use some communication skill. And he's talking a little bit about his own life, talks about his girlfriend, and that kind of makes him upset because then he's realizing that his wife is, upset with him. So that doesn't go well. There's a little bit of a communication parallel there that the father doesn't like. And then at some point he just says, he kind of looks down. He's almost getting him to drop the handle, and then he does, and then he lights himself on fire. And he lights on fire. Diaz goes straight to the car to get the child, while the father is burning. And I'm wondering like what's going to happen here. And then out of nowhere, you see somebody from inside the convenience store run out with a pretty significant fire extinguisher and put out the fire on the guy, and then put out the fire on the car while Diaz is removing the child from the back seat so he could take the child to safety. And there's a little short scene after that where they're driving back to the car, and I think that might be the next scene where they have a conversation about what happened at the gas pump. And I think we'll talk about that one next because I think that's scene 6 where they have that conversation in the back of the police station.
Yeah.
So that's definitely some intense. From the guy going to get his taco in his hospital gown to putting out a guy. I mean, he could have blown up that whole gas station too if it would have gone any worse. The gas is leaking and it ignites back into the tube, and who knows if there's some kind of shutoff valve or
Yeah,
something.
they have safety measures for that. It'd be really hard to do that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, it was like it reminded me of those simulators, like the fat simulators where you stand in front of the big screen and you have to like talk to it
Yeah.
and shoot at it, and you have an operator behind you that's like branching the story. And so I felt like this was one of those situations. Like it was so crazy, out of the, like it was so like gonzo like situation
Right.
that
Yeah.
I'm like, I feel like this is like some video game, training thing that you do, that, a situation I bet there's been a situation just like that. I'm sure one time somewhere in the United States that exact thing happened. And just like when you do those training video simulators, like all those things are kind of based on real stories, but it's just so crazy. And then like like you, if that happened to you, like if you're Diaz, like you need a couple days off. Like
Yeah.
you need a couple mental health days. Like, like we did a thing in the sheriff's department and they kind of implemented it later in my career, uh, where if you are on scene at a quote unquote like critical situation, like a shooting or a guy maybe lighting himself on fire or something like
Yeah.
that, you can request I need 3 days off. So basically, like after if you're involved in a shooting, you automatically get 3 paid days off. And basically they just like if you're the shooter essentially, and then everybody
Right.
else. I think they did, but if you were on scene and you witnessed it, like you basically would also get 3 days, just kind of
Just
rest,
to,
decompress,
right. Process it all.
process it. Yeah, like like they need that. Like seeing some dude light himself on fire. Are you kidding me right now? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
that is
Yeah.
so brutal
Yeah.
that you could see something like that anyway.
Yeah, it definitely was really intense. And, the thing is, I would say, and I would think you were kind of in the same, you know, environment, is that there's been a lot of change since, when you get into these critical incidents. It used to be you just kind of suck it up and just go on to the next call. There was no, take a day off, or nobody was asked. They might ask you, hey, are you okay? But there was no, opportunity for you to like take some time. And then, they've done a lot more to kind of address those kinds of events, to give people some time to, process them if they need it. I mean, some people might not need it. Some people, might be like, hey, I'm, give me the rest of the shift maybe, or I'm going to go file my paperwork and then I'm done for the day. And then I can come back tomorrow. I'm fine. Some people might be like that,
Everybody's
others may
different.
say, yeah, everybody's different. But they've definitely done a lot more to deal with those critical incidents and help people process it and kind of, mentally be good with it. But this one definitely too. I mean, if you're looking, I mean, you got a guy holding a nozzle with gas. I mean, ideally you just don't want him holding the nozzle with gas. That would be kind of like my first thought. Can we get the guy away from the gas? Kind of a thing. It's
Can we get the guy away from the gas? That would actually be, yeah, a good idea. That'd be number one.
yeah, that would be. I don't know if they would list that on the training videos, but get
Yeah.
the guy away from the gas.
There's like
Number one.
a little like the training video, a little bullet with like number one, get the guy away from the gas. Number two, whatever.
Right. Yeah.
Or
I mean
no, how
that.
about number two? Tell the attendant to shut off all hit the emergency button and shut the gas off.
Yes, off. Yes.
We could have done
So there's
that.
no.
There's
Yeah,
an emergency shut off.
there is. I think those buttons are actually around all the
Yes.
pumps. I mean, you just got
Yeah,
to.
they're right there.
And he probably has one inside the building too. I would think. I mean,
Oh,
up by
absolutely.
the front.
Yeah, like
desk.
if that guy's paying attention, he's not ringing somebody up for a Slurpee or something. Like he should be shutting out
Yeah,
gas.
shut the gas down. And the Diaz should be thinking, man, I need to get the guy away from the gas.
Oh my god.
Yeah, for
If he was
sure.
Chuck
Yeah.
Norris, he could have done a spin crescent kick and kicked the lighter right out of his hand.
He would have tried to do the nozzle, and then he would have done a reverse roundhouse and got the
Yes.
lighter out on the way
Yeah.
back.
Yep.
Yeah, and then that would have, and then they could have just grabbed him and took him away from the pump. And
If
then
we could, if we could
all's
only,
good.
if we only could have had Chuck Norris there, that would have ended peacefully. But we didn't. We didn't have
Yes,
him.
it's like the Texas Rangers. Yeah, they say
Yeah.
Texas Rangers: one Ranger, one riot, one riot,
Yeah,
one Ranger.
one Ranger, one immolation.
Yeah.
That's all you need.
So that whole situation basically the scene ends with them putting the guy out, putting the fire out and getting the child out of the car. So scene 6 is they're back at the station now, and you could tell Diaz is clearly upset. He's kind of not really saying anything, and Harmon kind of walks up to kind of find out what's going on, and she's trying to like say, hey, look, it didn't work out. Well, the guy did end up lighting himself on fire. He's still alive. And Diaz is thinking like, well, that's really not a consolation. Like, really, he still got hurt. Ideally, you don't want anybody to get hurt. And, Harmon says, that could just been a murder-suicide. We could have not even rolled into that. And that could have happened all on its own. And it could have been where the husband ends up killing the wife and leaves the child in the car, or, could have been worse all the way around, depending on what the guy was going to do. And so, she's trying to like say, hey, look, keep it in perspective. She does make an interesting point where she says, all this stuff that happens to you on patrol, when you do police work, and you really don't think about it when you start the job. You probably, and everybody has their own idea of what police work is when they start, what law enforcement is and what it's going to be like. And then obviously as you do the job, you realize it, in some cases, it really wasn't what you thought it was going to be. I mean, there are parts of it maybe that were what you thought it was going to be. And then other parts you thought, I never would have thought about how to deal with any of these kinds of things. And so she says all this stuff happens. She says it really kind of, she used clarifies. It kind of clarifies everything around you, and it kind of makes everything more clear for you. It's almost like it runs like a lens over life and says, these are the things that matter. And when you do the job, you realize what those things are because you see all these other things that can happen. And it really kind of focuses you on those good things and paying attention to those good things. And then so at that point, she goes off and she was about to walk away, and then she turns back and tells him the reason that some of the people don't trust her, and it had to deal with Lasman, who had a partner, and that partner got a little used a little too much force, and Harmon had stopped him, and then he had pushed her, and it turned into a case. Even though she didn't complain, it turned into a case. It ended up getting Lasman's partner fired, but there was some trying to cover up about what had happened about it, and there was an internal affairs investigation, and it kept Lasman from getting promoted, and they promoted Bishop instead of Lasman to lieutenant, and so that impacted him personally, and so he now, probably one of the reasons he kind of has this negative attitude towards Harmon. And so Harmon explains all this to Diaz, and then once she's done with telling him why, she tells him, but don't ever question my integrity again, because now you pretty much know everything. Then you know why they're upset with me. And then that ends the scene. So, as far as like, and maybe for you, like when you first started, there were some things that you thought, oh, I thought police work was like this. And then when you started doing law enforcement, you said, wow, I had no, unless you had family members that did it, but I don't know how it was for you. There was some things that you really said later that, whoo, this isn't what I thought it was going to be.
Well, I mean, the things that sound cool about doing law enforcement, like really is like 2% of the job. Really, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
the quote unquote exciting stuff is very few and far between, unless you're working in Long Beach. Maybe it's all the time, but yeah, I mean, it's a lot of driving around. You're doing car stops. There's a certain kind of mundaneness of it that is bad in the sense that it can get you complacent and you might lose that little bit of that vigilance that you mentioned earlier, that state of
Mm-hmm.
vigilance. But yeah, I mean, it's like the report writing and all that. I mean, it's and I don't think people really appreciate the amount of time that goes into in detail of writing a report that's going to be reviewed by multiple people, investigators. If it goes to court,
Mm-hmm.
the district attorney, the defense attorney, the court. Yeah. So like the things that actually turn out to be really, really important is your ability to communicate on a piece of paper, as it turns out. Maybe more than you could be a great cop, you make a lot of stops, you could arrest people, but if you cannot articulate in a report why and what you did, they're not going to file those cases. You're going to get them thrown out. You're not going to look good on
Mm-hmm.
the stand. All the things. So that ends up being actually very, very important.
Yeah,
But it's not
it's a
exciting.
big part of the job. It's not exciting at all. And back in the day, their computers were, you look in the '90s, and it wasn't until kind of the late '90s and 2000s did computers really kind of start to take hold in the reporting process. You would a lot of times write your reports, or you could direct dictate your reports onto a cassette tape,
Mm-hmm.
if that's what you'd like to do. to make it more efficient and to go back in service a little quicker. You still had to fill out some of the forms by hand, and then that was translated into a permanent you know file that was that would be part of the department's recording system. But yeah, once computers kind of took over, everyone kind of had to learn how to type. I mean, there may have been some officers who didn't really have to be great typers, and basically everybody had to be a pretty decent typer because that's the way reports were filed. You would get on a computer screen and you would type out your report, you would fill in the boxes, and you would click and check stuff, and then you would send it, and it would go into the system, and it would be reviewed, like you said, by all kinds of people. So everyone's going to be looking at it to see if. And then the show, you don't really get any sense of that at all. I don't even know if I've ever seen him like write a report yet, which doesn't make for great TV. You don't want to see someone down sitting at a desk writing something out or clicking on the computer. Not
Yeah.
something that you want to show. Not that exciting, but it's definitely
Yes,
a huge part.
sitting in the station an hour after you're supposed to get off. It's like midnight or 1 or something like that, and your trainee is like just struggling on that report, and you just want to just push him out of the way and just bang it out for him. But you're a
Right.
trainer, you're like, Tio, you can't do that. And I remember just having those nights where I'm just like, this like kind of tilted back in the chair in the station, and like, oh my god, please just get me out of here. Write this report.
Yes. You get the report so you could be. I there that did bring me. This is actually there was another kind of trainee series, and it was I think it was on TNT back in the day, called Southland. And I do remember a scene in that series where the FTO was telling the trainee who had just got into a shooting, and he was like, okay, what had happened with that whole thing, and he's saying, hey, look, you did what you did what you were trained to do, and this and that, and he kind of says, you know, he called like the beat. I mean, I'd call it the beat, but he called it the greatest kind of you being where you're at, you doing this job, and he's still learning it. You have a front row seat to the greatest show on earth because you get to see everything. You are going to show up to everything. You're going to see everything. Most people don't get to see that because they're not sitting in your seat. And there's a lot of ways to look at that. Obviously you want to do it, the best you can. You want to do it with some humility. You want to do it the way that you're supposed to. Obviously, if he's training him to do it legally and all that sort of thing. But it is one of those things that you're going to get to see things that other people are never going to see. And he called it the greatest show on earth. And I think there was a lot of truth to that. You get to see some things some things you and I would talk about, and no one is ever gonna, no one ever is gonna. Oh yeah, that's right. I've seen that too. That unless they've been sitting in the seat, they wouldn't know what that was like, and they wouldn't have experienced it before. So, I think that's what she's kind of saying. Hey, look, you go out and you do your job, and you help somebody, and the fact that they're alive, she's like saying that's a win. I mean, you did everything you could. He's standing there with a hose with gas and a lighter, and you did your best to get him to put it down and to get some help, and it doesn't always work out exactly the way you want it, but you did what you could do.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah, you can't, you kind of have to take what is given in these situations. And but that, I mean, that doesn't fix your sense of sadness or whatever, the loss of the situation. Like, that doesn't fix that. I mean, and that's why a lot of people in law enforcement really struggle with mental health, because a lot of these situations never resolve in a way that are satisfying. And like, when people ask me, tell me a cool story from your career, and I don't like, most of my stories are either very sad or gross, and so It's sometimes hard for me to even think about
Hmm.
something that would be quote unquote cool. I'm like, oh, I was in a vehicle pursuit, blah blah blah. Like, oh yeah, yeah, that sounds good. Like that's always the one I always talk about because I think people when they watch TV, they think that's what you do every day.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, the truth is that a career in law enforcement is ups and downs of human emotion, and you're showing up on everybody's worst day, which is interesting, dynamic, as opposed to just about
Yeah.
any other
Going to
job
a
you can
happy
think.
event.
You're going to a, yeah, you're
Yeah.
not, yeah. It's very different. It's a very different dynamic for sure.
Yeah. I mean, you could be going to 10, 11. I mean, I had some days where I'd go to 17 calls or maybe sometimes more, but that's a lot of calls you're going to depending on how fast you go to it, clear it. And every time you go, let's say just, 2/3 of them were negative or they had a negative, you know,
Hmm.
involvement in it where they're not happy to see you. They don't want you there. They don't think you should be there. This isn't your problem. And you got dispatched for whatever reason. It's like, I don't care what anybody says. After a while, that can definitely take a toll on you. You're not going where people are happy to see you show up. And, oh, thank you for being here. Or thank you for showing up. You just don't always get that. And you get 10 calls like that where it's negative or they're not happy that you're there or, they're, like Diaz's mom kind of has some negativity towards law enforcement or the police. That wears you down. And, you're doing that 4 or 5 days a week. That can make for a long week. And obviously officers and everyone that does a job finds ways to find the positive in it and leave with a somewhat of a smile, or at least a decent attitude at the end of the day. And some
Hmm.
kind of let it come at them. They get real negative and they get kind of cynical, and that can happen over time for sure. And so you meet somebody who's been on the job for a while. A lot of times people say, "Oh, that guy, he's so cynical," or that officer, that retired, he's so cynical, and that has a lot to do with it.
It does for
Is that?
sure. Yeah, I've seen it.
Mm-hmm. So that kind of wraps up this episode, episode 5, Not Your Savior. We're going to have more down the road for you and talk more about the series. And so if you have comments, put those comments in there or maybe questions. We'll definitely try to go through those and respond to some of them.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
yeah, and I don't know if you have anything else to throw in there before we wrap it up.
No, let's wrap it up. And if you're watching this on YouTube, we also have this podcast is also being distributed on Apple Podcasts and some of the other podcast kind of popular podcast platforms. So you can find it other places. Maybe you want to listen to this while you're driving around. And if you do like this, we'd like you to like and subscribe. That'd be really helpful for us. It helps with the algorithms, getting us out there more. We also have a Facebook group. A Facebook page for this podcast. So look for that in the description. And thank you for taking time to spend an hour and a half with us and
Yeah.
talking about police work and the show. It's fun, and we'll look forward to seeing you guys next week for episode 6.
All right. Sounds good. Look forward to the next one.